Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. And so I just thought I'd jump on and do some more work examining CJ Cornthwaite. So this is his second video. So I'm going through all of his videos. And so we went through his first video a few weeks back. And now we're going to go through this video, which is 5 mistakes Wes Huff made about the Bible on Rogan. And one of the reasons I'm going through this, I'm not just picking on Cornthwaite. I'm going to go through a lot of Bart Ehrman material and a whole bunch of others. And I guess give a bit of a different opinion because my perspective is that someone like Cornthwaite is actually a predictable product of the academy. And so he actually is how most people end up. He is how most Christians end up. But a lot of people just go, well, I'm still going to go to church. I'm still going to believe, in a God sort of thing. I'm still going to go along to church because my parents go there or because it's got a good Sunday school program or whatever. And he seems to have done that as well. He seems to have jumped out of Christianity and became atheist agnostic. And then he's jumped back into Christianity. He labels himself as a Christian. Now, I can't for the life of me think of why he would label himself a Christian, especially if he says that he knew the Bible very well and all the rest of it. He even said that if he grew up in a Muslim country, he would just be a Muslim. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, he should know. If he knew the Bible that well, he should know. You can go around calling yourself, an exact replica of Muhammad Ali, but if you can't box, why even say that? Or if you hate boxing, you're just sitting there on the couch getting fat. It's like, well, why would you bother? And so he calls himself a Christian, and there's a lot of things that he says in his videos. I've just been going sort of randomly through some of his videos, some of the more recent ones, and obviously we're going through his earliest videos. So this one here it says 1 year ago, and I think he's done like maybe over 100 videos. So we're going to be going through quite a lot. This one goes for 17 minutes. He claims to basically believe everything that Bart Ehrman believes, which is quite amazing, because if you were to be a true free thinking agent, as if you would come up with exactly the same thing that Bart Ehrman has. See, that what I find is these guys, they come across promising that they're neutral and saying, well, I'm just a scientist. Wherever the evidence leads, that's where I'm going. But the evidence always seems to lead them in the same direction that 10 other people are in who are making a lot of money attacking Christianity and saying that the Bible is false. And so obviously Bart Ehrman is the leader of the pack there. And he's the one who actually has proper credentials as a bona fide scholar. And so not that I agree with his scholarship. I mean, you can be a scholar in the Book of Mormon. You can be a scholar in the New World Translation of the Bible. It doesn't make you a great scholar. But you can be a good scholar, but in the wrong thing. That's pretty much what I'm trying to say. Now, obviously, Cornthwaite isn't up to that level. So he's borrowing ideas and concepts from other people. And it seems like most of these guys from Myth Vision, what's his name? Dan, I keep forgetting his last name, which shows you that I'm coming to this fresh, and I haven't watched all their material and gone, hey, I'm angry with these guys or whatever. I'm just going through, and if they say something that is true, I'm going to agree with it. And some of the things that he says, I agree with. Like when he talks about Ravi Zachariah, I remember a friend of mine, really good friend, and I put it out there. I said to lots of people, it was on Facebook, and I said, can you recommend any apologists? and he said, I don't agree with this guy on everything, but Ravi Zachariah is pretty well known. And so I got back to him after that. You know what it's like when you recommend something and you put a caveat there, and then people come back and go, what about this? What about that? I was that person because I started Googling Ravi Zachariah, and I was like, hang on, this guy, he's compromised with the Roman Catholics. There was this clip of him basically getting confronted about Roman Catholicism, and he danced around it for like 2 minutes, didn't answer the question, and you could tell that he was in collusion with the Roman Catholic Church, which just, like, to me, that's like, one of the main things. It's like, don't hang around cults. Like, just don't do that, And so Cornthwaite was very influenced by Ravi Zachariah. Like, here we see, even in this video up here, Dr. Ravi, Christianity's fake intellectuals. Now, you can tell the videos that I've gone through, they have red at the bottom. This one doesn't have red. I haven't gone through that. But funnily enough, I have gone through this one with Dan Wallace, but it doesn't have the red thing. But maybe it's faded away or something. But just to sort of, I guess, give you a bit of a background, it seems like Cornthwaite he's lost his faith. He used to run a youth ministry. He was getting as many credentials as he possibly could. But what he doesn't sort of realize is, in getting those credentials, that's why he lost his faith. just jumping in with both feet, being the exception in the class, doing all your homework, handing everything in on time, studying it to the nth degree, you will become an agnostic, because the seminaries are so poisoned. The seminaries are so deceptive that if you take what they're teaching to its logical conclusion, you'll end up in atheism, you'll end up in agnosticism. And so the thing is, too, one thing that you've really got to recognize is, if someone has a track record of being wrong about things, then they could be wrong again. And I guess I'm pointing 3 fingers back at me. I was an atheist for a long time, and I became a born-again Christian. And so I guess I could be accused of that. Well, you've flip-flopped, you've changed. But the thing is, he was in a church, in a once saved, always saved church. So according to his original once saved, always saved beliefs, he is still a born-again Christian. He's once saved, always saved. Which, I don't believe that. I don't preach that. I've had a debate with Pastor Brett on that. If you want to know what I believe, if you just type in Nick Sayers, Pastor Brett, OSAS, you'll get the debate, and it goes for quite a long time. And I sort of answer a bunch of questions afterwards. But so he's grown up in this tradition, in Christianity. He's done his best to sort of, jump into all the arenas of, following the correct apologists, the going to the right schools and all the rest of it. And he's ended up in unbelief. And to me, it's because of the fake Christianity that he was involved with. That so some of the things that he says about Christianity, I'm like, yeah, I say that. I'm not in disagreement that there are a whole bunch of weirdos who call themselves Christians. There are a whole bunch of people who wear a Jesus T-shirt, and I think they wouldn't recognize Jesus if they walk past. If you walk past on the street, they wouldn't recognize him. That Jesus would say, "I never knew you. Who are you?" And so I can understand him, being frustrated with Christianity, being frustrated with the state of apologetics. I come against a lot of apologists. I think a lot of apologists lie. I've debated apologists who just lie straight to my face, lie to the audience, and I'm like, what is that? Especially when I came out of atheism, and then I'm part of the church. Like, one of the main things is you don't lie, you don't deceive, you don't do those type of things. And then to meet people who are professing Christians who do those type of things, it sort of amazes me that they would do that. But I'm finding more and more that this is just the norm. It's sort of normal to lie, you know. So I know I was recommended to look at Cornthwaite's videos by Dwayne Green. So Dwayne Green, he runs his channel. He talks about textual criticism. He's a Byzantine prioritist. He's oftentimes looking at the Greek and looking at the Hebrew, looking at mostly New Testament stuff. And he jumped on one of my streams and said, "Hey, have you heard of this guy?" And he's a Canadian, like Wes Huff is, and so I just jumped on to his YouTube and I started watching things, and I thought actually this would be a good case to go through, because he's saying, "Hey, I was involved in Christianity, I gave my all, and look at what's happened." And so a lot of people would follow that and think, well, this is really convincing. I mean, Bart Ehrman convinces a lot of people that he was, evangelical and born again and loved God and all this sort of stuff, and then lost his faith. And I think the issue is these guys don't realize how corrupt the Christianity that they're involved with is. And so it's almost like it's a different religion. So, you got Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff like that. But when you get people who are like modalists or something, oneness Pentecostals, and it's like, who are they? A bit weird. But it's like these guys have been involved with that type of church, the evangelicals. But this is like the mainstream church. And so this is the thing. Just because something is popular doesn't mean it's true. And to me, these, like Bart Ehrman not having faith anymore, Cornthwaite not having faith anymore, saying, "Oh, I'm a Christian, a cultural Christian sort of thing," but coming and dismissing lots of things in the Bible. To me, these guys are just predictable products of the groups that they're hanging around and what they're learning from these groups, which is that the Bible is filled with error, filled with problems, filled with contradictions. The Bible is not trustworthy. We have a new Bible on the scene with Westcott and Hort. We have all these amazing new manuscripts all around us now that we can reference to. And so these guys someone like Cornthwaite, he would have just accepted that as a normal thing, where to me, that is where the corruption starts. But he thinks that he believed in infallibility, that the Bible was without error, inerrancy. He thinks that he believed in inerrancy. But you can't match that up with what's happening in the academy, with the text of Westcott and Hort, with the Nestle Aland 28th edition. You can't match these things up. It just doesn't work. You can't say Christianity was hidden away. The Bible was hidden away for 1600 years, and all of a sudden it's back. And it's like, oh, these are the correct readings. Oh, we had it wrong all that time. It's like the Jehovah's Witnesses, oh, well, in the early church, they were right. And then, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they faded away up until 150 years ago, and now we're back, sort of thing. That's what they say about the Bible, which is so strange. It's so weird. And so they have a different view of history, and he's a historian. And I would just say, if he ever does watch these videos, that he has the wrong side of history, that he is on the wrong side of history. He has been influenced by Unitarianism. And this Unitarianism has caused a whole bunch of heretical nonsense to enter into the church. And he is believing in a Bible that has so many holes, so many contradictions, that you can't just sit there and be a thinking person and think that doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect your spirit. That, oh, this verse is taken out. Oh, hang on, the last 12 verses of Mark have, 99.99% of all Christians everywhere have believed that. then all of a sudden it should be taken away. In the last 50 years, they've started to put doubt on it, and most Bibles bracket it. Some have even omitted that, not the most popular ones, but it basically, when it's double bracketed in the NA 28th edition, that means it shouldn't be there. He believes this type of stuff. He believes that Jesus used a Septuagint edition, which is strange. It's weird. John Owen in the post-Reformation period, he spoke against this type of nonsense. And this is the thing. He thinks that's normal Christianity, which it's not. It's the new ShamWow sort of thing. It's the new. It's not just the Westcott and Hort text that's corrupt. It's all the methodologies that come with it. It's the believing that the Septuagint can override the Hebrew. It's the belief that Jesus and Paul used the Septuagint. Like, just that alone opens the door to so much confusion. Then let's delete 12 verses of Mark. When 99.99% of the manuscripts have it, only 2 manuscripts don't have the last 12 verses of Mark, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And 1,634 manuscripts have the reading, have the long ending, they call it. And so what are you going to go with, 2 or 1,634 manuscripts? But the thing is, these guys, the Jehovah's Witnesses, don't like those verses either. And this is the thing. These guys would physically shudder if they found out that I'm on the internet saying that they're like Jehovah's Witnesses in some of their beliefs. But it's true. This is the reality of it. They follow the critical text. This is why the Jehovah's Witnesses gravitated toward that. They started using the Westcott and Hort text, like Charles Taze Russell saw 1 John 5:7 was not in there, and he was so glad, and these guys will just say exactly the same thing as a Jehovah's Witness, as a Mormon who is attacking the Bible, because lots of Mormons attack the Bible as well, as we see with Dan McLennan. I keep getting his last name wrong for some reason. Anyway, I'm going to go through his videos as well. So let's just start getting into this, because I could just waffle on forever, and you know what I'm like. I've already gone for 20 minutes and just waffled. So we have, and this, by the way, this is a different time. Usually I do my videos early in the morning, and so usually in America it's sort of like, between 6 and 8 o'clock at night. So people, they're relaxed, and it's probably like 4 in the morning or something. So we're not going to get our usual crew. So we've got a few Aussies, obviously, saying g'day all. Faith that worketh by love. He's in the house. Dazed Razor says, could I ask you an example of an apologetics lie? Not just a conversational inaccuracy. I've been agnostic for years, and I'm still kind of stuck in between. Okay, so say an apologetics lie, they are told to say, modern-day apologists, when they're talking about bibliology, they're told to say that we have 5,800 manuscripts. The myths and mistakes guys will say 5,200. That's Elijah Hixson and Peter Gurry. But regardless, say 5,500, just to keep the numbers nice and round. They're told that we have 5,500 manuscripts, and we now have access to all them. In the Nestle Alarm 28th edition, they have examined these manuscripts, and they've come up with the readings that they have, which is not true. Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are they're the 2 main pillars of Westcott and Hort's text. Okay. The Nestle Alarm text is the 28th edition of the Nestle text. So I'll give you a tiny bit of history of how that went. Basically, Westcott and Hort got together and said, we don't want any Byzantine influence on our text. And Byzantine is like 99.99% of all the texts. They only have like about 50 manuscripts that don't really agree, like in a sense, with the Byzantine text. And so when you have this type of situation, what they did is they got Vaticanus and Sinaiticus and said, these are the best. So instead of just like, well, these two are sort of it's a minority, that, well, you have to make an excuse for why you're just using two. So they said these are the oldest and they're the best. Okay. I doubt both of those claims. And until we actually chemically test them, Nehemiah Gordon, who's been on this channel, he was able to go to the Vatican and test the amulets that were there. Say at 1 John 5:7, there were 3 dots there in the margin, and he was testing these type of things in Vaticanus. I think he inadvertently did date Vaticanus, but he can't really say it. I would really like to go back over that information, maybe have him on again and chat about that. But until these things are actually chemically tested or XRF tested, we don't know the age of these. The top scholars, like the Ahlens, that's who we name the Nestle Aland text after Kurt Ahlin, they were duped to think that archaic Mark was a 13th century Byzantine text that was a representative of Codex Vaticanus. They were duped to think that that was a real manuscript. They chemically tested it, found Prussian blue ink in it, which means it's a modern day forgery. So the Museum of the Bible, they tested the Dead Sea Scrolls that they had personally bought. They bought a handful of Dead Sea Scrolls and had them on display. And someone said, hey, let's test them. So they tested them, and they're all fake. They're all modern forgeries. So not saying all the Dead Sea Scrolls are modern forgeries, but those particular ones that they had were in the Museum of the Bible. So there are fakes around. So when people say this is the oldest and the best, usually people are just taking that by faith. I take it by faith that they are modern. Like, I think Erasmus was correct in saying that Vaticanus was a back translation from a Latin document, probably made around the Council of Florence. And Sinaiticus, if you look into the Simonides affair, he claimed to have written that in 1839, 1840. It was found in 1844. And so it's most, like, to me, I believe by faith that it's a modern day forgery. And someone who believes it's like 350, they believe that by faith. That's all I can say about that. So getting back to your question, Westcott and Hort didn't use the Byzantine text, so they only used really Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And the thing is too, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus differ from each other so much. Like, just in the Gospels, there's 3,000 differences. Now, Hermann Hoskier, who evaluated these and came up with the over 3,000 differences, I think it was like 3,057 or something like that. He didn't do his usual collation. He just had a cursory look, sort of thing. If he had used the 17 other types of tabulation that he usually used when he was going through other manuscripts, he would have had tens of thousands of differences just in the Gospels. So these two are like, it's like one's Danny DeVito, one's Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it's like, oh, they're twins, they're related. It's like, they're not related, dude. And so, but don't let the pesky facts get in the way of a good story. Westcott and Hort got these. These are the two pillars of the critical text of Westcott and Hort. They also got Unitarians to help them with the text. A lot of people don't know that. They're like Jehovah's Witnesses. George Van Smith was a Unitarian. He worked on that project. So anyway, they got that text. They hated the Byzantine text, so they're not using it. And then there were a few others who made a text. Tischendorf made a text. Weiss made a text. Weymouth made a text. So there was a bunch of people who made texts in those days. Now, around 1898, Nestle, he was working on his edition, his first Greek edition. So what he did, he got 3 texts. He got the Westcott and Hort text, he got the Tischendorf text, and he got the Weiss or the Weymouth. Those sort of swapped each other out after a while. But where they differed, he put marginal notes down the bottom. And that was his first text. Okay, so he went through all the way through to the 1950s and 1960s when Kurt Ahlin sort of took over. So it became the Nestle Aland text. So you had Everhard Nestle. So his son took over, and then Kurt Ahlin got involved. So it became the Nestle Aland text. But it's still based upon these 3 sort of manuscripts. Now, what Bruce Metzger said was that when they started to look at the text, they were involved with the United Bible Society's text as well. which is on its 5th edition. And what they did is he said that they went back to the original Westcott and Hort text, and they started amending the text according to other manuscripts or reasoning or whatever. So they actually rehashed the Westcott and Hort text back I think it was the 1960s that they did that. And then the Nestle Alarm 28th edition, if you just go back to like the 23rd or 22nd edition, like that is like a Westcott and Hort rehash. So the one that they have today is basically Westcott and Hort with a different haircut. It's so close to Westcott and Hort that there's there might be like 700 differences, but in a document where there's so many words, it's not a huge amount. Like 700 differences can mean there's 3 changes per chapter sort of thing. It's not a huge amount. So but the Westcott and Hort text, or the Nestle Alarm text, differs from the Textus Receptus. It has 2,900 less words. So the Greek text used in the Reformation period, the Textus Receptus, the Westcott and Hort text has 2,900 less Greek words. It has 8,000 changes as well in the Greek. So that causes problems. And so when you're translating a different text. And so what apologists are told to say is that we have an embarrassment of riches. We have all these manuscripts everywhere. James White will say, hey, no one could have tampered with the text because the Bible went everywhere. Mums were copying it. School kids were copying it. Pastors were copying it. It just went everywhere. The Bible went everywhere. So we don't have the same problem as other groups like Islam and the rest of it, where they just sort of have one person sort of controlling the text. The Bible went everywhere. So how could you control that? But he's obviously not talking about his text. Like the Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, they could have been controlled if there's only really 2 manuscripts that they go with. Now, they might get a bit of Alexandrinus here and there, or a bit of Codex Beza here and there. But at the end of the day, mostly they're going with Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And what happens to the other 99.99% of all the Byzantine manuscripts that back up the King James Bible? Well, they just throw them under the bus. So if you were to go past, say, Dan Wallace, and he's in a church and he's saying, hey, we have an embarrassment of riches. We have 5,500 manuscripts that we've looked at, and we've discovered all these, and we have all these new finds and everything. And we have them listed in the bottom of the apparatus on the NA28. We have all these readings listed there and all the rest of it. Do you think they're actually interested in those readings down the bottom? No, they're just going to go with what Westcott and Hort discovered, or what they compiled with Unitarians. They compiled that, and they've still basically got the same text, regardless of all the other evidence. All the other evidence is pretty much backing up the King James. so they can just say, hey, we've looked at everything. It's a bit like being a communist and you studied everything that von Mises ever said about capitalism and freedom and all the rest of it, but you have no interest in it. You're still going to stick with your communism. You know what I mean? And it's like the apologists are trained to deceive you and say that we have this embarrassment of riches, we have all these manuscripts everywhere. But if you were to say to Dan Wallace, okay, you've convinced me, Dan, where's this embarrassment of riches? And he'll go, okay, come and have a look, I'll show you. He'll open up the vault, and there's these manuscripts. Oh, it's only 2 manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, and like a spattering of other readings from Alexandrinus and a few other weird documents. It's like, oh, is that the embarrassment of riches? Like, yep, that's it. It's like, what about all the rest of it? It's like, oh, mate, we only say that we look at them. We don't really follow them. We have no interest in them. Now, they do have a thing called the CBGM, which is the coherence-based genealogical method, and they use computers. It's sort of like we use computers now, like as if we've got AI involved or something. It's pretty much a nothing burger because it spits out some really weird stuff. But at the end of the day, they might go with a Byzantine reading here and there because there's been a revival of scholarship in the Byzantine manuscripts, like people like Maurice Robinson and others. And so they're like, oh, well, let's throw them a little bone here and there. That, to me, that's what it looks like. It's just sort of like the Westcott and Hort text with a, a Byzantine little earring, sort of thing. So anyway, that would be one lie that apologists say. And so to me, that is like deliberate. Like someone like James White, like say on the Ankerberg program, 1996, Dan Wallace said Westcott and Hort used 2,000 manuscripts to get their text. And I was just like, huh? 2,000? But their whole concept was to reject the Byzantine. So why would they use... Like you got to look at it, like back then they only had like probably 10 manuscripts. Like that was sort of like they had Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, maybe Alexandrinus, maybe Ephremi Rescriptus. They might have gone through to a few others, but it's like, oh, seriously, they probably had like 10 men, and like 99% of the time they're going with Vaticanus or Sinaiticus. And it's like Dan Wallace is claiming they're using 2,000 manuscripts. No, they're not. They're ignoring them. They're throwing them under the bus. But he says, no, we're using 2,000 manuscripts. And then he said, today we have 5,000 manuscripts, and the Nestle Alarm text uses all that information. And it's like, that is just deception. So Dan Wallace lied straight to your face. These apologists just lie. And so anyway, hopefully that helps. And just saying, I've been agnostic for years and I'm still kind of stuck in between. I would just say, just grab a King James Bible and start reading it. So Days Writer says, oh, this is a live airing, not a live stream. Sorry. No, it is live. We are live. Or I'm just an idiot who can't read. That's fine, mate. Don't worry about anything. Truth Defenders says, revolution question. Was Joseph Henry Thayer a Unitarian? Yes, he was. He attended a Unitarian church with his father, but in 1853, when he was 25 years old, he joined the Congregationalist Old South Church. Okay. Let me just check. I'll just look up the name Thayer here, see if I've got any information. But I'm pretty sure he is a Unitarian. But sometimes, people can be a bit hasty to label people. Okay, 41, 42, and 105. Okay, so 105. And 41 and 42. Nearly there. Okay. Another Unitarian on the American Standard Version Committee. So this is David Cloud for Love of the Bible. David Cloud's pretty good. His stuff is usually very well researched. This is page 41 on this book. Another Unitarian on the American Standard Version Committee was Joseph Henry Thayer, 1828 to 1901. He died in 1901, the year the ASV was published. He was the assistant to Ezra Abbott. Ezra Abbott was definitely a Unitarian at Harvard, and succeeded him as Bussey Professor of New Testament Criticism and Interpretation at Harvard Divinity School when Abbott died in 1884. Thayer had been a professor at Andover Seminary, but resigned, and there's a bunch of information there. Thayer could not assent to the infallibility of the scripture and the dignity of Jesus Christ. And it says here, as we have seen, the Unitarian connection runs deep in the history of textual criticism. At least three of the men who produced the English revision of 1881 and the American revision of 1901 were Unitarians, and other committee members admitted that the Unitarians were influential. They influenced many others in their writings and teachings. Two of these Unitarians held influential positions at Harvard Divinity School, etc. And so then we had another one here, which mentions Thea. Okay, it just says Vine, Thea Brown, or Strong, Zodhiates, Webster. So it's just mentioned his lexicon, which I've got up there. And yeah, so I'm pretty sure he was. So I would go to Way of Life, or just type in David Cloud, Thea, and maybe we can just do that right now. Why not? Thea, Unitarian, maybe Wikipedia will just give us a bit of a quick rundown. Joseph Henry Thayer. Okay. Working on the revised version. Greek English lexicon. Okay. Doesn't really say that much, so, but there might be a few links that are helpful there. But if I type in David Cloud, Fair Unitarian influence on modern Bibles. This one, the Bible version, Hall of Shame. That's a PDF, so it might take a bit of bandwidth there. Okay. Thayer. Okay, so it just mentions the name. Many prominent early textual critics, Daniel Mace, Wettstein, Geddes, Harwood, George Van Smith, Ezra Abbott, Thayer, Weiner, Caspar, Rene Gregory, Unitarians. Okay, so that's just a small little mention. And then we've got this one. Let's go to Thayer. Is that how I was spelling it? Yeah, Thayer. Thayer. Yeah, maybe there's an index at the back of the book. Not really. So anyway, yeah, hopefully that's sufficient for you to work that out or to search a little bit further. Minuscule says, how exactly would that help to make an informed decision? I'm not sure exactly what you're looking at there or what you're referring to. So I might have said something and I've forgotten what I said. So Truth Defender says, Thayer believed the Bible contained errors. The pestilent tented gained currency that the Bible is absolutely free from every error of every sort. The change of attitudes towards the Bible, page 62, 63. Revolution, thank you. That was helpful information. I wasn't sure if he was one until the end. Okay, yeah, cool. So that's great. Truth Defender. All right, so let's get into this. So one thing I just want to point out from the beginning is Cornthwaite makes out that he is neutral. He's just, it's like when you run into someone who believes in evolution, their theory isn't just as weird as Hinduism or something like that. And they don't have any presuppositions. You know, they're just coming with a blank slate, just looking at the evidence and just weighing up things like a scientist would. They're like walking around with their beakers in a science class and just going, oh, that's the reaction, and writing down the notes and just giving us information. Yeah, he is just completely neutral, which we know is absolutely not true. He is saturated with critical text understanding, for starters, and like, well, to me that is the poison. That's what has poisoned him. He's gone into Christianity thinking that if he just trusts what the pastor's saying, trusts what the apologists are saying, that those wells of water that are there that have been provided to him, that if he drinks from those wells, he'll have a great journey. But he's become poisoned. And he's sort of trying to figure out what's happened. Now he's gravitating toward Bart Ehrman and all these other guys and pretty much agreeing with them, even though some of the things that he's saying are so absolutely easily debunked. Like if it wasn't, if the stories weren't in the Bible, if they were just in a fictional book, or like a history book of anyone, like any modern person, character like a Hitler or a George Bush Senior or something like that, you would never think that it's a contradiction. Like the whole Judas thing, I just recently did a video on that. The whole Judas thing of having him hang himself and then having him fall to the ground and his stomach burst out. It's like there's just no contradiction there. Like, and the thing is, the money that he threw on the ground, they picked it up and bought the block of land that he killed himself on because it's sort of become cursed. And it's to bury strangers in and all that. It's called the Field of Blood. The stories complement each other. There's just no contradiction there. And I went through it and I was like, okay, what am I not seeing? Surely these guys have seen something more important than what I can see. And there was just nothing. I kept going over it and over it. And it's like, there's just no contradiction whatsoever. But it's the Bible. So you've got to find a contradiction. And this is what I find. These guys have a presupposition that the Bible is full of contradictions. So they're going to find them. And if you actually say, hey, that's not even a contradiction, well, you're just a desperate fundamentalist who's brainwashed, and you're just trying to defend the indefensible, as if it's almost as if nothing can be true. But to me, the Bible is like a book of mathematics. I mean, 1 + 1 will equal 2, no matter what. And just because someone comes along and says, no, 1 + 1 equals 312, I'm like, well, no, that doesn't make sense. And they're like, well, you're not a free thinking person. It's like, well, no, actually 1 + 1 just equals 2. It's like, to me, these type of things, the vast majority of what he brings up, I had to deal with because I came out of atheism into Christianity. And I went through the whole thing of, I used to believe in evolution. I went through the whole thing of, Christians telling me that the earth is young. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. But studied it and went, hang on, I'm wrong. And went through that whole thing. And so to me, when someone like Cornthwaite is bringing up this type of material, it's sort of stuff that if you've come out of atheism or come out of whatever into Christianity, and what I find is if people are face to face with other people on the street evangelizing, these questions and things just come up all the time. So you're not hidden from them. You're actually really confronted with them, and people go out of their way to try and trip you up. And so you eventually have to get to the bottom of it, because you're a Christian. Like if Christianity is a load of rubbish, I'll say so. But it's not. I can't find, like, people say, well, there's mistakes here and this is a problem. And I go through it and I'm like, look, I've read everything that you've read about it. I've looked at everything that you've looked at, and I'm just not seeing it from your perspective. And in fact, you're sort of saying that you're getting this from scholasticism, from a Bart Ehrman, because he's a guru sort of thing. That to me, it's like you've joined a cult. You've joined the anti-Bible cult. So he, all the way through this, just think he's trying to make out that he's neutral, and someone like me or, other Christians, they have a barrow to push, and we're sort of desperately trying to defend our faith. Where, to me, I'm not desperately trying to do anything. I'm just going, 1 + 1 = 2. And someone out there is saying, no, it's not, it's something else. And I'm like, no, it is. And what do? Like, we're just sort of we're dancing around these things, but that's why I thought I would do these videos from the beginning, go through their earliest videos and go through absolutely everything they bring up and study it through. And so let's go through this.
So I just watched the Joe Rogan.
Okay. Yep.
An interview with Wes Huff, and I want to respond to it as somebody who is trained as a biblical scholar. So I have a Master of Divinity, a Master of Arts in Theology, and a PhD in New Testament from the same institution that I think Wes is currently studying to get his PhD from the University of Toronto. I'm also Canadian, so maybe I have a similar accent. When I'm sitting here as a biblical scholar listening to this argument that Wes is making, I'm first of all really impressed by what Wes knows. He's obviously spent a lot of time learning the breadth of history to be able to talk about like Sumerian and Egyptian cultures, but then come right up in, Middle Ages, talk about manuscript traditions. Wes is obviously a super smart guy, and he's put in a lot of work. But Wes is also a Christian apologist, and Christian apologetics is the discipline of trying to start from what you already know and trying to find the evidence for it. And that is literally what's happening here.
But is that actually wrong? If you know something to be true, like 1 + 1 = 2, you know that that's true. Are you allowed to defend that? Can you be an apologist for mathematics? Yes, you can. There are certain things that are true. Now, people who say that there are different types of truth, or if maybe 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 on some planet somewhere else, it's like, well, let's just deal with reality here and now. Let's not talk about hypothetical stuff. But Cornthwaite is basically saying all apologists are just they have their belief system, and they just want to defend that at whatever cost. Now, I know there are some people out there who would just, if they saw a gaping hole, they would just say it. Like, I've been in churches where there are people who, are in and out of belief. You know what I mean? That they're sort of straggling and they're in and out of belief. And so they'll just say, oh, I don't know. What about this thing in the Bible? Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt. I don't like that story. It makes me feel bad. What sort of God would do that? I've listened to people in church say that sort of stuff and just say it out loud. And they don't really care if people think that they're doubting or whatever. And like I said, especially when you go out evangelizing and you're running into Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Catholics, and you're running into people who used to be pastors, and they're like this, they've become atheists, or I've met them all, and that they come up and say, hey, what about this? What about, like, everything that Bart Ehrman would say? They're half the time they've read his books and they're repeating stuff. And so you've got to know your stuff. And anyway, let's just let him continue.
And I think this is probably why, if other biblical scholars are watching this, either on computer or on their phone, they're probably screaming at their screen, because it's really frustrating to hear a discipline just kind of butchered into proof texts and proof arguments to fit with whatever your apologetic conclusion is that you probably formed before you actually came to the discipline.
So you've already formed this. You've already got this belief that that God's real, the Trinity is real, all this sort of stuff, and then you just you're scrambling around trying to find an answer for that. And so, but let's just flip it around. I find that people who go, hey, I no longer believe in the Bible, they go searching to back up that belief. And the amazing thing is, Cornthwaite believes pretty much exactly what Bart Ehrman believes. And if you've watched any of my videos, some of what Bart Ehrman believes is ridiculous. It's strange. It's weird. It's biased. He has some very biased scholarship. Like when you look at his example of Codex Bezer, having Jesus heal someone out of anger. He's basically getting like a 5-cent piece and holding it right up here. Where if you look in the correct context, like that reading in Codex Bezer, I think the NIV used it, but apart from that, no one else has. It's a weird reading, and the Textus Receptus doesn't have it. And so, at the end of the day, the Bart Ehrman has a barrow to push. and there's a lot of deception in what he says. And, I've gone through enough of his material, like we're doing now with Cornthwaite, to realize that he isn't just a neutral scholar saying things that are just in front of him. He's just noticing, sort of thing. No, he has a barrow to push. He has presuppositions. And so the fact that Cornthwaite gravitates towards Bart Ehrman, when I know there are problems with Bart Ehrman, there are issues with his scholarship, certain things that Cornthwaite has just believed and adopted, he's just joined a different cult. So he's jumped out of the pan into the fire. He's jumped out of sort of lukewarm, sort of weird apologetic Christianity sort of thing. He's jumped out of that straight into the arms of Bart Ehrman, the myth vision guys and all that. And strangely, he's in agreement with them. You'd think that a free thinking person would be in disagreement with them or would find problems with them. So this is one of the things, like, I consider myself a free thinking person, and people have called me that over the years, when things have happened. It's like, well, Nick's probably got a different perspective on that, sort of thing, because he's thought those things through. And so why isn't Cornthwaite like going through Bart Ehrman's material and finding problems? Because there are plenty. Why isn't he like even just one or two or five, handful of problems with Bart Ehrman, and saying, hey, yeah, that's not really good scholarship there. That actually he's got a barrow to push. Actually, what he's saying is just completely made up. That's completely untrue. But he's not. He's just in agreement. He's just slotted in with the guru. So that tells me that he's actually more so just influenced by others rather than just having a free thinking mind that is just coming to these conclusions, and he's just stating the obvious sort of thing. Because what he's saying, and when he repeats Bart Ehrman stuff, it's not the obvious. It's something that is twisted. It's something that you have to have adopted the critical text narrative to believe. It's like if a Jehovah's Witness says something, and you got a friend who goes, well, Constantine invented the Trinity, or something, Constantine changed the Bible, and says something really daft and weird that a Jehovah's Witness would say, they're parroting them. They're just believing them. They mightn't admit it, but he does say, I pretty much believe exactly what Bart Ehrman believes. So he's following a scholar.
So I want to talk about what I see are four major errors. Errors is a strong word, but I think the problem is when I look at these things, none of them are as cut and dry as just like, we have this evidence and this is really crystal clear. It's actually not. And there's really complicated discussions for each of these things. And I can't do.
And these complicated discussions, it just means someone's written a book about the resurrection or something like that and thought of every possible negative thing that you could say about it. So that's a conversation. And that's, if you have 100 scholars who agree with that book, well, consensus comes into it. And the more people that you get involved with this, you've got a crowd now. And so, well, it must be true. These scholars are believing this. And the thing is, like I've just pointed out, like there were many Unitarians involved with Westcott and Hort. And the revised version, most Christians have no idea about that. They have zero idea that Jehovah's Witness type weirdos who don't believe in the Trinity, who don't believe in the deity of Christ, have made their Bible. The Greek Bible underlying, the NIV, the ESV, and all the modern Bibles are based upon that. And these Unitarians were involved with that. Most people have no idea about that. And so Cornthwaite, he's just grown up in this environment where there's this weird Bible around. And you got to go and study, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, and you got to adopt the critical text methodology. And these are things that have taken him down a path of agnosticism and unbelief.
Do it justice in a 5-10 minute video. But I'm going to try and give you a really quick overview of what I, as somebody who is trained in biblical scholarship, hears and is thinking when I'm listening to Wes Huff argue about the main claims of Christianity. And this is all I'm qualified to talk about. I'm not qualified to talk about ancient Egypt or Sumeria or any of these things. I was trained as a New Testament scholar, early Christianity, and I'm going to stick with that. So the first argument is that the Gospels are eyewitnesses. This is something Christian apologists like to say a lot, that the Gospels are just different people giving witnesses or of things that they saw, or copying down recollections of people they knew who saw those events. So famously, the tradition is that Mark copied from the apostle, or from Peter in Alexandria. These are claims that are not really justified. I mean, I think most biblical scholars would agree that the Gospels were probably not written as eyewitness accounts. There are 4 Gospels. I can't talk about each one of them, but let's just talk about the principles of what you would expect from eyewitness accounts and why you don't see that in the Gospels. When I was a kid, I was taught that the Gospels were like 4 witnesses to a car accident, that you have like 4 different perspectives. And even though they have slight contradictions and they have differences in their approach, fundamentally you get at the same thing. This isn't actually how the Gospels were created. We have 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that are the synoptic Gospels, and they actually use each other. So Matthew and Luke use Mark extensively. They don't use it like our...
So we have this concept that, here's Matthew using Mark, or using Luke, or Luke, later on is amended to match with Matthew, and all this type of thing. Now, at the end of the day, these type of things, many times the actual narrative is ignored. So when you've got Jesus talking to an audience, like if you had Martin Luther King get up and said, I have a dream, and he went through his I have a dream speech. Lots of people have that memorized. There would have been people there on that day who, thought about that, maybe even wrote it down. The fact that you can get some eyewitnesses there who can say exactly the same thing, especially it's not just Martin Luther King saying it, it's God in the flesh. They're revering this guy as the Messiah. So that they're like, man, I'm the most privileged person on the planet to have this. Like, he makes out like it's just a witness to a car crash. It's like, oh, well, that lady was just speeding and she smashed into this thing. And well, I know a lot of Christian apologists will say that. The underlying themes that are natural when you read the Bible are that these witnesses were hearing the same message. See, they make out that, Matthew was like, oh, what am I going to write in this thing? I'm just going to copy Mark. I'm over trying to think about this. And so I just give me Mark. Okay, let's just go through. I'll plagiarize a fair bit of it, but I'll just elaborate on something. Some things I don't even want to put in there. I'll just leave them out. That's how they make out that the Gospels were written. No, these people had access to either Jesus firsthand or secondhand. And so having having Luke interview someone who was a first-hand witness, that's just as good as having a first-hand witness. You know what I'm saying? Just because someone has written that down. But someone is saying, hey, Luke, this is exactly what Jesus said. He said this and he said that. And these guys keep making out these the Bible is filled with contradictions. And I'm going through all the ones they're saying, going, man, these are so easily debunked. Like, give us a challenge, for crying out loud. Like Judas, he hung himself. It says he fell headlong. What did he fall from? like just walking along and fell. Like, just happens to me every day. I just fall headlong and just my guts spill out. No, it marries in to the fact, and what you see even in the Reformation Bibles at that place in the book of Acts, it actually says, it's sort of like it should be in italics or whatever, but it sort of says, like the King James doesn't have this, Geneva and others do. that Judas hung himself and then fell headlong, sort of thing. Like it actually sort of grabs that little bit out of Matthew and puts it in there. And it's like, it just makes perfect sense that people would, that the reason that they've done it obviously is so because you got these two stories that seemingly are different. But when they've just got that one little bit and put it in there and said, hey, remember, he hung himself, so he's fallen headlong, it makes perfect sense. But these are the type of contradictions that sort of give them license to go, see, the Bible's the dumbest thing ever. Why would you believe the Bible? And then you go to the next one and it's just as dumb. The next one is just as dumb. And it's like, then they've got a whole bunch of critical text ideas of, Jesus used the Septuagint, and, that they've got a whole bunch of stuff that's really questionable. And then you've got this type of mess with either a Q source, which is just taken by faith. We believe that in a Q source. Now, I'm not sure what Cornthwaite believes, whether he follows the Q source, but people who follow that, now he follows Bart Ehrman, so he probably doesn't believe in a Q. But Q is like a hypothetical, so it doesn't exist. But they say, oh, that's what they all copied from, sort of thing. They sort of ignore the fact that Jesus was a real person who spoke real words. And people were very interested in what he said. Now, if Jesus came to my house tomorrow, said a whole bunch of stuff, do you think I'm going to just go, oh, that was nice, and then 20 years later go, oh, what did he say again? No, I'm going to be writing it down. I'm going to be thinking about it. I'm going to be talking about it. I'm going to be, talking to others saying, yeah, remember he said this? Oh, no, remember after that he said this? Yeah, that's right. I'm going to be ringing up people talking about it. I'm going to do a live video on it. That they went out preaching. What do you think they were preaching? They're with the guy for 3 years. You can read through the Gospels in 3 or 4 hours. Do you think that's all that happened? They would have been talking about it, thinking about it, going, hey, and Jesus would have been repeating messages as well. There are times when he preaches the same message somewhere else. So Jesus was repeating things, and they were, he might elaborate on something or leave a little bit out. Just a natural preacher. He was going around preaching everywhere, healing, delivering, doing all these miracles. And so the disciples, they were soaking this all up for 3 years. And then in the book of Acts, boom, it's all coming out. They've got all that message inside of them. So that's why it's the same. And not just just some guy copied from another guy. They just seem to want to undermine the fact of Jesus's existence. So they don't want God to exist. So the whole concept of having, you have to read every book separately. You have to get Matthew and figure out, if you only just read Matthew, what would the conclusions be? Oh, well, they don't mention this type of doctrine in Matthew, so they didn't believe it, sort of thing. And, and they separate everything. And then it's there's no thread that goes through the whole Bible that ties it all together. Bart Ehrman will say this all the time. But there is. There is. If you go through from the beginning, Genesis, all the way through to Revelation, you can see theme after theme after theme. And it's inexhaustible. There's so many things, even just the whole concept of Passover, of that being a type and shadow of Jesus, the very hour that Jesus died, the 70th week of Daniel prophecy. I remember I was getting interviewed by T-Jump. So he's an atheist guy. And he said, well, if the Bible actually predicted the day that Jesus was born or something, I'd believe it. But it doesn't. And I said, oh, okay, so you don't know the 70th week of Daniel prophecy. And he's like, oh, I've never heard of it. And here he is saying, I'm an atheist. An atheist is a statement of faith because he hasn't exhausted every possibility. If he doesn't know the 70th week of Daniel prophecy, that the very hour, the very day, that Jesus stood on Palm Sunday on the 10th of Nisan and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I wanted to gather you together like a hen gathers its chicks, but you were not willing, and you've missed the day of your visitation. that was the fulfillment of 483 years that was predicted in the book of Daniel. If you don't know that prophecy, how can you reject it as stupid? You know what I mean? He's like T Jumper was like, no, the Bible's just silly, and it doesn't predict anything accurate. And I'm like, okay, what about that one? And he didn't know it. And the more that we talked, I was just like, yeah, but you're actually rejecting what I'm saying just because I'm saying it's from the Bible. But then he was accepting some sort of Hindu thing that said the Earth was like 13.8 million years old, whatever it was. And it's like he would believe that just because it's anti-Bible, but he wasn't willing to look at what I said, study it through. Like, at least he should have said, yeah, hey, you've got a point there. I'll go and study that through and I'll see if it's correct. He was just like, no, silly, dumb. Bam, shut up. Okay, show's over, and let's go to the next guest. And that's what I find. People, they have a barrier to push. They're not really interested. When there's answers given, good, sophisticated answers given, they reject them, and they're not really interested. And if someone's interested or not. Like, have you ever been mid-conversation and you just think, this person's not even really listening to me? Why am I bothering moving my jaw up and down when they don't even care what I'm saying? Like, a bird could fly past and they'd look at it and just go, oh, they have no interest in what you're saying. And when you're witnessing to people, when you're talking to people about God and Christianity and all the rest of it, or you're listening to someone push their atheism, push their agnosticism onto you, if they're interested. Like, I know straight away if people are actually interested in truth, that I'll say a few little key things and they'll go, hey, that's actually a really good point. And so like, I was listening to Cornthwaite today, and he was saying, when Jesus was going around doing miracles and healing and all the rest of it, he went to this town. I think it was in his hometown, and he couldn't do many miracles there. So they make out that this is a big, problem. This is a problem. He couldn't do it. He was restricted and all this. No, it says the people didn't believe him, so they wouldn't have shown up. Like, if he's doing a meeting somewhere and he's like, okay, everyone, you come out tonight. I'm going to be, preaching here in the main marketplace. We're going to convert it into a big area where you can all come. And only like 10 people turn up, then he couldn't do any big miracle there. But it says he actually healed a few people on the way out. So it's not the fact that he was restricted. Like, I've heard charismaniacs say, oh no, it was like the spirit of doubt was so big there that Jesus was trying to break through, but he couldn't do a miracle there. Some people have weird interpretations of the Bible, but it's more so just the fact that no one was there. And the people who were there, he healed a few people on the way out, and it's like, that's it. He couldn't do any big miracle there because no one showed up. They didn't believe him. And like, I couldn't do that either. If I turned up somewhere to preach and there was only 10 people there, like, okay, it's not a big miracle. If the whole town turned out, there would, like he was used to having, there would be a big miracle there. And so, but Cornthwaite has adopted the charismatic type of teaching on that, and said that Jesus was restricted. And that's just another one of his little ticks, like, yep, see, the Bible's got these contradictions in it, but it's just easily answered. Like, you just have to give it a little bit more thought. But he's like, no, I'm going to jump into Myth Vision and Bart Ehrman and these other guys who have just got 10 other weird things that they would say about that. But it just comes down to, is it practical to think that way,
Inspired by it. They actually copy it. We can see this in the Greek. They copied out word for word in a way that's impossible if it's oral tradition. The word for word alive.
Okay, they copied out word for word. Okay, so they're talking about the same story. Like, this is Jesus, Mark 2:9, where he's saying, which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, rise up, take up your bed and walk. So it's this one. And it is a tiny bit different in the Textus Receptus. I did double check this. I'll just show you that here. So you mightn't be able to see that. I might just have to make it a bit bigger. It's not even really worth looking at, but I just thought I'd show you that I'm actually doing a little bit of homework here, double checking things. So we see the NA, it was a 27th edition. The Sioux here and the Soy here, Soy boy. But and the Sioux actually, which just means you in the plural, it does actually change position, but it's not really that different. And so you see the Sioux here and the Soy here, and there's really no difference between these two that I could see. No, it looks like a comma, and that's it. So, yeah. Anyway, I just sort of show you that I sort of did all that, and I was expecting to find something. I was like, I didn't find anything, so I'm just showing you guys. Like, I don't want to put it to waste, sort of thing. But let's look at it. We've got agar here, which is sort of in the middle. It's not in these ones. So is it copied absolutely word for word? Well, gar is for. And we have these other words that he hasn't highlighted. So, of course, if it's Jesus saying, which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven or rise up and walk, well, that's a memorable thing. He says, if he's really the Son of God, if he is really the Messiah, like Jehovah God in the flesh, which, it took some of them a while to really get that. But he's obviously the most important person who's ever been in Israel, like way more important than Moses or anyone. And he's talking. And yet you have a whole history of the Hebrew Bible of people doing things which are very exciting or very mundane, but it's all written down. And so here you have a bunch of Hebrews who are used to that type of culture, and they wouldn't think about this and talk about it later, and let's give the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps Mark copied Matthew. Perhaps Luke later came along and elaborated on, let's give the benefit of the doubt. What's actually wrong with that? And see, what you're about to see is he says this is a problem. They're so similar, they must have copied each other. You see, that's a problem. So, okay, well, why? Why is that a problem? Now, obviously, I believe that it was the same story, and these same witnesses saw the same thing, and that's why it's similar. It's not like one's looking in one direction at the Pharisees and, let's join his conversation. And the other one was like, I'm going to listen to Jesus, and the other one's just gone for a walk and he's picking his nose and, he's like, well, it was a beautiful day, No, they're all watching the Messiah. And so, of course, they're going to say the same things. So he's saying that that's a problem. To me, it's not a problem. It's a solution. But anyway, let's continue.
They copied out word for word in a way that's impossible if it's oral tradition. The word for word aligns over sentences and paragraphs. So what you actually have here is a tradition of direct copying and some adaptation. Matthew and Luke also copied older Gospels. So they copied a gospel that scholars refer to as Q. And again, there's pretty universal.
Okay, so he does believe in the Q thing. I thought, now this is his earlier videos. He might have changed, because I have been listening to some of the stuff he's brought out just in the last few days. And some of it on my YouTube just randomly goes to some video that's like, 5 months old or whatever. But he did say that he basically believes everything Bart Ehrman believes. And Bart Ehrman doesn't believe in Q, but he just has this elaborate way of saying, Mark was probably first and it's copied by Matthew. And, I can't exactly remember what Bart Ehrman says, because it's, one of those things in which I'm just like, man, it's just another excuse to get rid of the fact that these people are witnessing someone talking. Okay, if you went and just say you got an invite, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, if you got an invite to the White House today, and he's there saying, hey, we're going to go into Venezuela and we're going to do this in Iran, and hey, we're going to do this with tariffs, and if you got 3 or 4 people who sat there and listened, they could walk out and go, yeah, well, that's what happened. Like, they might even write it down, or they're going to tell others that, imagine a press conference. What did he say? Well, he said this and he said that, and then he said, and they're going to say the same story because it was a real event. Like, to me, that's the fact that they actually do line up is way more evidence that they're seeing the same thing, rather than it's just like, well, they make out that as if Matthew was just copying Mark and just went, hang on, I could make this story so much more spicy if I just write this extra little thing in there. That's their presupposition that they come to the text with. And so anyway, he's talking about Q, which is quite remarkable that he's talking about Q, because Q is not evidence. It doesn't exist. And so anyway, let's let him talk.
Agreement among biblical scholars that there was an older sayings gospel of Jesus behind Matthew and Luke. So Matthew and Luke, in compiling their gospels,
it's agreed among scholars. So because scholars agree on it, the consensus. This is what Bart Ehrman says all the time, and it drives me nuts. It's like, well, the consensus of scholars is this.
Looking to older gospels. And we can actually see these traditions in the gospels, and we can also see them evolving. So one example I like to give is of Jesus' baptism in Mark, that Mark has this story of Jesus' baptism, getting baptized by John. And you can tell that other gospel writers really kind of struggled with this, because why would Jesus need to be baptized if John's baptism was for the repentance of sin? So Matthew has this thing where John and Jesus have this conversation, and John says, well, no, you should be baptizing me. Luke really downplays this baptism, and he kind of just says in passing, like, oh yeah, and Jesus also got baptized. And John actually doesn't mention a baptism at all. He just mentions the Spirit descending like a dove. So not only are these gospels using each other, but they're reacting to each other and building off of each other in a way that doesn't really seem to be just somebody saying like, oh no, that's not what I saw something different. They're actually responding to traditions that they each carry. The other thing is that even the earliest accounts we have of gospel writers don't really give us.
Okay, so I'll just touch on that. So firstly, he's saying he believes in a Q document. So there's no manuscript of Q. So he's going on zero evidence for Q. Okay, there's no manuscripts, there's no quotations about Q. No one ever talks about Q. Okay, there's no patristic evidence for Q. There's no ancient awareness. He's saying he's a historian. There's no history behind Q. It's like you may as well just say aliens came down and gave them the words. Q doesn't exist. It's just a hypothetical. But because a lot of people believe it, there must be some weight in that, and that's just scholasticism. So on one hand, if the Gospels are very close, Jesus is saying something, hey, the Gospels are very close to each other, well, they must have copied each other, that's what they were doing. But then if they differ and they have different information, well, it was an evolution, and they were just adding this and subtracting this, and one of the guy, obviously Mark, he didn't put enough information, so Matthew had to elaborate on it because he was embarrassed about Mark's reading, and Luke came along and went, oh, how am I going to fix? I'm going to mop this up, and he just cleaned it all up. Sort of, this is ridiculous. And it just comes down to his presupposition that there's a problem with Jesus getting baptized. Now, obviously, John the Baptist said, I need to be baptized of you, and you're coming to me, because he's righteous. John the Baptist had pointed him out. That's the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. Like, he recognized him as the perfect one, the one who takes away the sins of the world, the Lamb of God. And here he is coming to him. He's like, and he recognized straight away, I need to be baptized by you. And then Jesus said, let it be so. to fulfill all righteousness. Now, what Jesus is basically saying is, look, I know I'm God in the flesh. I'm Jehovah the Son. I don't have any sin. But as an example for others who do have sin, I've come as a man. I've humbled myself as a human. And so I'm showing them the way that you should be baptized. And once you become born again, you should go and get water baptized. That's what the Bible says to do. And so he's showing as an example. Everything Jesus did with his disciples, with the methodology that he had, was an example for humans to follow, because he's the Word manifest in the flesh. He's God manifest in the flesh. Okay. He could have just came to Israel and had like laser beams coming out of his eyes and hovered like 10 feet off the ground and just like, said, hey, worship me. And everyone would have gone, man, this is freaky. Hey, there's God. Yeah, but he didn't. If you read in Philippians, it says that he humbled himself. He made himself of no reputation. Here he is, God, and, Almighty God. And he put himself into a human body. And then he's there washing the disciples' feet of horse manure and donkey poo and all the rest of it. And he humbled himself. This is what Jesus did. He didn't have to do that, but he did that. And he chose to do that. Now, he humbled himself. He wasn't sinful, but he went and got baptized as an example for others to follow. Then after the baptism, the Holy Spirit came upon him. And so this is an example for believers to follow. Everything Jesus did was so that believers could follow. Like if you look at Peter, like Jesus is walking on water and he said, if it's you, let me come out in the water. And Peter walked on water. He followed him. And Jesus could have been just what Jesus did, the disciples did also, didn't they? And so he didn't do things that were out of the realm of what a human could achieve. And so he did things for an example for people. So it's pretty much a biblical theme that flows all the way through. Or else why be a human? Why not just be like a massive eagle or something who's just hovering over and just with a loudspeaker, or why not just be a 400-foot tall person, and just scream at everyone, or but he humbled himself. He did what he did. And there's no contradiction in Jesus getting baptized. Just because it was a baptism for sin, it was clearly recognized by John. Hey, you should be baptizing me. And Jesus is like, hey, don't worry about it. Let's do it to fulfill all righteousness. Let's just do this. And this is an example that Jesus was showing for everyone to do. So he's made up that there's this contradiction. Then he's made up that, they were trying to fix it, and that the Bible is like an evolution. That people, like, where's the proof that they were embarrassed by this reading? Where's the proof of that? That he is just reading that into the text. And so baptism of Jesus. Okay, so let's just see if there's anything in this. Now, obviously, Wikipedia is not the greatest place to go, but it's a good start. So we have, it's in the three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Synoptic gospels, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. Okay, so Matthew's account is unique in several respects. He asserts that Jesus left Galilee for the purpose of being baptized by John. He includes a conversation between John and Jesus in verse 13. I need to be baptized of you and you come to me. Nevertheless, Jesus convinces John to baptize him to fulfill all righteousness. Matthew records that the voice from heaven says, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased, but does not indicate to whom that is addressed. So Mark's account is roughly parallel to that of Matthew, which describes John's initial reluctance and eventual consent to baptize Jesus, which is not described by Mark. Mark uses an unusual word for the opening of the heavens, so like ripping, and then Luke begins with John the Baptist, Zechariah, etc. And then Jesus was praying when heaven was open and the Holy Spirit descended on him. Luke clarifies the Spirit descended. So, I mean, I guess, I was sort of hoping that they had the scriptures there in my favorite version, and of course they're not going to. But I can just look them up. Let's just look them up. Okay, so let's just type it in, because that's what we're doing here. We don't want to just rush through. And if he's made a claim that there's this evolution of the text, well, we want to see if that's true. If it's true, I'll go, wow, there is an evolution of the text. Maybe there's a different answer there, or maybe there's a problem there, and I need to jump on Bart Ehrman's train. But I doubt that. Okay, so let's go to where are we? Is that in verse 14? Okay, so yeah, Matthew, I think it's chapter 3, isn't it? Chapter 3, Matthew 3. Okay. So John the Baptist came. Okay, so let's just read through that. Then cometh Jesus from Galilee to Jordan unto John to be baptized of him. But John forbade him, saying, I have need to be baptized of thee, and comest thou to me? And Jesus answering said unto him, Suffer it to be so now, for thus it becometh us to fulfill all righteousness. And he suffered him. And when Jesus was baptized, so that's sort of like a whole nother thing where they say, oh, it's contradiction. They try and see a contradiction in absolutely everything. Now, some of the Bibles do have contradictions, some of the ones based upon the Westcott Hall text, but the King James I've found to have zero contradiction. I've been challenged for years and years and years, and I'm just left there standing going, there's just no contradiction there. It's like the whole Judas thing is just ridiculous. Okay, so then we've got Mark 1:10. Let's check that one out. Okay. King James Version. There we go. That's better. Okay, and preached. There is one mightier than I after me, who the latchet of whose shoes I am not worthy to stoop down and unloose. I indeed baptize you with water, but he shall baptize you with the Holy Ghost. And it came to pass in those days that Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized of John in the Jordan, and straightway coming up out of the water. So it's a tiny little bit briefer. It doesn't give that much details, but Mark is a little bit briefer. It's only got 16 chapters in it. It's immediately, we can see that word here. Immediately, the Spirit drove him into the wilderness. Then after that, immediately he went and started preaching. Immediately, the word immediately is all the way through Mark. It's shorter. So there's going to be certain stories that are shorter. It's not, it had to have evolved. Okay, so let's look at Luke. I think it's Luke 1. Luke 1, King James Version. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be my be-all, end-all study. I'm just having a quick little look at this. And obviously, there's going to be things that he's going to bring up in later videos. But he's probably going to do a whole video on Jesus getting baptized. But at the moment. We're just going through. We're just checking things out, getting familiar with what he's thinking about. Okay. Must be the next chapter. Yeah, or maybe it's chapter 3, actually. Yeah. Next chapter. I'll have to go back to my Wikipedia source. Okay, Luke 3:11. Luke records Jesus was praying when heaven opened. Okay. So this is Luke 3:11. Okay. Okay, so here it says it. Now, now when all the people were baptized, it came to pass that Jesus also being baptized and praying, the heavens were open and the Holy Ghost descended upon him like a dove, etc. So it's just in passing. So how on earth is he getting the concept that these are evolving text? I guess, that's something I'll keep in mind. I'll keep these tabs open for the next few days. I'll put them side by side. Maybe I'll even copy and paste these verses into my website, my Textus Receptus website, and I'll put them side by side and show exactly, maybe I can do that. I can chat GPT it. Chat GPT. Is there any, or are there any proofs that Matthew, Mark, and Luke copied each other and the story of the baptism of Jesus evolved? ChatGPT. Short answer, no. There are no proofs in the strict historical sense that Matthew, Mark, and Luke copied one another or that the baptism of Jesus evolved. What exists are modern hypotheses built on literary observations and philosophical assumptions, not demonstrable evidence. Below is a discipline level breakdown. And so it's got, the whole thing of copying Matthew or Mark or Luke. And, and I've seen people go right into this and spend thousands of dollars on books trying to find, talking about Q, talking about who copied who. And it's like, at the end, I'm just watching the whole thing going, Q's just like a myth. It's like trying to find, it's like spending money traveling around trying to find the missing link. And it's like, I could just go up to them and say, hey, save your money, the missing link, it's not real, people are trying to find Q, they're trying to wrap their head around this whole concept. I don't think it's as complex as that. These people followed Jesus. They said in their testimonies, or the testimony of other eyewitnesses, that this is what happened. And it says here, the baptism of Jesus and the evolution claim. The claim, critics argue, Mark is primitive, Matthew is embarrassed, Luke softens it, and John removes it. Because I didn't think of that one, because sometimes I sort of hear Bart Ehrman saying this type of thing. Like, oh, John's completely different because he didn't like what the other guys had written. They pit them against each other. It's like when James White pits one King James company against the other. Like the Oxford guys, they didn't know what the Cambridge guys were doing, and so that's why they made mistakes. And it's like the more people that you have, the more mistakes they're going to make. It's like if they know what they're doing, the more people you have, the better. But you've got four. You got Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and because John's different, that's because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the same. That's a problem. But because John's different, that's a problem. So when is it not a problem? You know what I mean? When do you get to the stage where it's not a problem? What do they want? What will convince them? If it looks like it's copied, that's a problem. If it looks like it's an individual just talking about a whole bunch of other things, that's a problem. They're just never happy. So it says here, this argument rests upon one assumption: Jesus being baptized by John must have been embarrassing. But that is a theological presupposition and not a historical fact. Okay, so it says the baptism text, what they actually show. Mark 1, Jesus is baptized. Number 2, there's no apology. A voice from heaven affirms his sonship. Matthew 3, John hesitates. 2, Jesus insists to fulfill all righteousness. There's no embarrassment. There's no theological explanation. Luke 3 says, the baptism is stated briefly. If focus shift to prayer and divine affirmation, it's still explicit. John chapter 1, baptism is presupposed, not denied. John testifies that he saw the Spirit descend. I forgot that that's in John 1. So the key point, no gospel removes the baptism. If it were embarrassment-driven evolution, it would disappear. It does not. And it goes on for a long time talking about this whole concept of embarrassment and how that's just read into the text, and that's their presupposition. And I'm like, that's ChatGPT is the business. Now, I just want to say, I know this really good musician, and he, like every musician nowadays, Spotify pay you for 1 million hits on Spotify, you get $4,000, which really in today's world is nothing. like it's an insult. It's like 0.04 cents or something per. I've probably done the math wrong there, but. And so AI has taken over. There are so many, a lot of the songs that you're listening to are just AI. Okay. So what do? Do you just go, well, I'm an old traditionalist and I'm going to keep playing my guitar and out of tune and sing, and or do you just jump on board and go, hang on, this is like electric guitars come on the scene. I've got to get on board with this. And so, a friend of mine, he's jumped in with both feet into the whole AI thing. And he said it's actually made him a better muso. He said because now he knows a lot about production. He's worked with lots of famous people. And he said sometimes you'd be there with someone with a really good muso and you want a certain sound from them. And you can be there for 2 or 3 hours with a top level muso and you still can't get that sound that you want. But you got to shut it down because, you've got limited time in a studio. You're paying lots of money. But he said with AI, you just tell it to give you 10 examples, and the 7th one is exactly what you've been thinking of. So it's actually a really, really good tool. And this is what I'm seeing with Christianity. When AI first came out, people were just absolutely petrified of it. I've been using it quite frequently, and it's very helpful. Now, yes, you can't trust it with everything. I remember asking who in history was the greatest defender of the Communihenium, and it said Dean John William Burgon. I was like, no. And then it said Maurice Robinson. I was like, no. And I kept arguing with it because I was using the Boyce one on my phone. And I was saying, that's not true. And it corrected itself for like a couple more comments, and then it went back and told me the same stuff again. And I was like, it's just wrong. Yes, it can be wrong like that. But there are times like this, it just gives you a summary that's just gold. And so that's what I find with some of these people, like, say, Bart Ehrman and Cornthwaite. And can't they just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, where do you think I'm wrong? And it will give them a whole bunch of things that they can repent of, you know. Anyway, so we've sort of looked at the baptism thing. I think it's a complete nothing burger. But we'll just go back a tiny bit and we'll just see what he said, okay?
Plays the baptism, and he kind of does have this. Writers really kind of struggled with this, because why would Jesus need to be baptized if John's baptism was for the repentance of sin? So Matthew has this thing where John and Jesus have this conversation, and John says, well, no, you should be baptizing me. Luke really downplays the baptism, and he kind of just says in passing, like, oh yeah, and Jesus also got baptized. And John actually doesn't mention a baptism at all. He just mentions the Spirit descending like a dove. So not only are these gospels using each other, but they're reacting to each other and building off of each other in a way that doesn't really seem to be just somebody saying like, oh no, that's not what I saw something different. They're actually responding to traditions that they each carry. How
he's just reading that into the text. And so Truth Defender says, if something is different, people see contradiction. If it's the same or similar, then it's copying. Some folks you just can't please. Yes, Ed, that's exactly what I was saying. Dale FC says, good morning, Nick and everyone. Try with Fire says, what will make or cause them, modern text critics, to understand the Gospels? Only the Holy Spirit, as it is written. Well, and that's the thing. They actively come against just even Jesus being a historical figure, that people were saying, oh, he said this. He healed a guy, and before he did it, he said, what's easier to say, you're forgiven of your sins or rise up and walk? They heard that. Some of them were first-hand eyewitnesses. Some of them interviewed others who were eyewitnesses, and they say exactly the same thing. And it's like, oh, they're just copying each other. So they want to get rid of the fact that Jesus actually existed. They want to make out that, like, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are just sort of sitting around going, hey, you've got a really good story there. Let me elaborate on it. Or actually, that's a little bit embarrassing. Let me just tame it down and not talk as much about the baptism. But yeah, anyway, really good point. And the thing is, like I was saying before, they want to get rid of God, the whole theme of God throughout the whole Bible, the prophecies and everything. They want to get rid of that. So Bart Ehrman basically comes out and just says, get rid of that, get rid of God, and the whole concept that the Bible is a whole complete volume, and also get rid of the fact that Jesus actually spoke and people are quoting exactly what Jesus said. So you've got these two massive things that are just taken out of the Bible. It's like, well, may as well just throw it in the bin if that's the case. But this guy says, I'm still a Christian. Why would you bother? Why bother? I wouldn't. If I actually were convinced, like this guy, that this is true, I would just be like, why would you bother? But he's making all these videos to help, I guess, and he seems to get a bee in his bonnet about someone teaching children this type of thing. And Try with Fire says, but the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. Yes.
The other thing is that even the earliest accounts we have of gospel writers don't really give us a lot of reassurance that these were eyewitnesses. So, for example, the church historian Papias, famously, he's quoted in Eusebius in the 4th century, but Papias was like a first, 2nd century historian, and he says that the Gospel of Matthew was written by the disciple Matthew. So that's really great. I mean, that sounds like an eyewitness to me. But the problem is he describes the Gospel of Matthew as being written in Hebrew. The Gospel of Matthew that we have, it was not written in Hebrew, it was written in Greek. So it's not even translated, just to get that out of the way. It's not even translated. It's actually very
like this whole thing, like when I first discovered that Papias talked about a Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew, I was like, Well, the Bible says go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations. That includes Hebrew people. Like, I'm sure they had Syriac editions. And it's like they're allowed to, to translate the Bible into any language. And so just because it's in Hebrew doesn't mean that that's a problem. It doesn't mean it's like he's seeing some sort of historical contradiction there. I'll just type in Hebrew Matthew. So I'm pretty sure that Papias isn't the only person who says that. Okay. Hebrew Gospel of, oh no, that's a full website. Here we are. Oh no, that seems different. I might just go to Matthew. Where are we? Search. Oh yeah, here we are. Gospel of Matthew. Now, let's search for Hebrew. Many of the quotations in the scriptures in Matthew are more closely matched to the Masoretic, leading many scholars to believe that the author could understand Hebrew. Well, I mean, it's pretty much a no-brainer that Matthew, there's so many Hebrew idioms in the Greek. He obviously knew Hebrew very well, very, very well. But yeah, and so this goes on to Q. So it's all the way through Wikipedia, all this rubbish. Maybe I should just type in Hebrew Matthew Gospel. And maybe Papias. Here we go. Hebrew Gospel Hypothesis. Okay, so the proto. Okay, so the idea that Matthew wrote a gospel in a language other than Greek begins with Papias, 125 to 150 AD. So Papias's writings are in Eusebius. So we don't have any of Papias's writings, but Eusebius, who's a church historian, he wrote about Papias and sort of said, well, Papias said this and did that. And, so he sort of has preserved his works in his material. So I'll just read through this. In a passage with several ambiguous phrases, he wrote, Matthew collected the oracles, the logia, sayings of or about Jesus in the Hebrew language. And it says here, perhaps alternatively, the Hebrew style. And that's one thing that I've thought about that Papias meant. And like I said, there's so many Hebrew idioms in the Greek that would make perfect sense. Okay, so but let's keep reading. Now, this is just Wikipedia. It's not me, but I do agree with that could be an explanation. And each one interpreted or translated as best that he could. Some have claimed by Hebrew, Papias would have meant Aramaic, that's a Syriac, the common language of the Middle East beside Koine Greek. In 2014, Survey of Contemporary Texts asserted that Hebraic meant Hebrew and never Aramaic. Nevertheless, Matthew's Greek reveals none of the telltale marks of a translation. Bomberg writes that Jewish authors like Josephus, writing in Greek, while at times translating Hebrew materials, often leave no linguistic clues to betray their Semitic sources. So that's a really good summary there. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's someone else who talks, maybe its origin talks about a Hebrew Matthew or something. So I remember going through this like 2 or 3 years ago. The scholars who do not believe that Matthew is a translation Most scholars do not believe Matthew is a translation, and several theories have been put forward to explain Papias. One theory is that Matthew himself produced, firstly, a Semitic work, and secondly, a recension of that work in Greek. And so that's usually what I think, that Matthew, he's a Hebrew guy. And so, perhaps he's written it out in Hebrew like a draft. And then it's like, then they've done the work, they've worked with scholars in Greek, amanuensis or something like that. Josephus also claimed to write a translation of an Aramaic version of a Jewish war, though both the extant Gospel of Matthew and the war are not translations. Another possibility forwarded by Maurice Casey, I have no idea who that is that Papias refers to a distinct work now lost, perhaps a sayings collection like Q, or a so-called gospel according to the Hebrews. A third, that is by Dia Lectoi, Papias may have meant that Matthew wrote in the Jewish style rather than in the Hebrew language. Nevertheless, on the basis of Papias and other information, Jerome claimed that all Jewish communities shared a single gospel, the so-called gospel of the Hebrews. Yes, that's right. Jerome said that. That's who I was looking for. That was practically identical with the Hebrew or Aramaic Matthew. He also claimed to have personally found this gospel and to use it in some communities in Syria. So what that would be is just like, if I go to the Trinitarian Bible Society and I get Franz Delitzsch's New Testament, which is in Hebrew, it's pretty much equivalent. It's a TR-based Bible. It's equivalent to the King James. That's equivalent to the Textus Receptus, which would be akin to the originals. So if you have that Hebrew, it's like, well, that it would match up. It's not going to be different, and all this sort of stuff. I guess there are places where it says as it is translated, like Emmanuel and this type of thing. But I'm always of the belief that it was written in Greek, the New Testament. But say like the Book of Revelation, I think God was speaking to John in Hebrew. I mean, why would he speak Greek to a native Hebrew guy? When he says, "Come up hither," come up here, I'll show you things that will be hereafter. I think he said that in Hebrew to him, but it's just written down in Greek. To me, that just makes sense. Jerome's testimony is regarded with skepticism among scholars. I've got no problem with what Jerome said there. Jerome claims to have seen a gospel in Aramaic that contained all the quotations he assigned to it, but it can be demonstrated that some of them could never have existed in a Semitic language. His claim to have produced all the translations himself is also suspect, as many are found in earlier scholars such as Origen and Eusebius. Jerome appears to have assigned these quotations to the Gospel of the Hebrews, but it appears more likely that there were at least two, probably three ancient Jewish Christian Gospels, and one of them was in the Semitic language. To me, it just makes sense that if you're Paul, you're Peter, you're going around preaching, you're turning the world upside down for Jesus. You're seeing a whole bunch of Greek people get saved. So, of course, the gospel is put into Greek, the universal language at the time. Paul had a heart for the Hebrews. He was like, I wish that I was accursed, that that they would get saved. I wish I would go to hell so that they could all get saved. You know what I mean? That's what he was saying. So as if he's not interested in doing a Bible in Hebrew. So I'm sure Matthew probably, and the thing is too, who's to say it wasn't first done in Greek, then done in Hebrew? My understanding would be Matthew, being a Hebrew speaking guy, he would have written out things in Hebrew. Then the others, amanuensis perhaps, who knew Greek, and perhaps Matthew knew Greek fluently as well. they would have worked together to put it into Greek. And this other Matthew was just sort of like, hey, that's a good source. That's a good one that is equivalent, and we can copy that and give it to all the Jews, because the Jews would have had the scriptures as well. It's not like it just went out in Greek and that's it. That it was early on in Aramaic. It's early on in that Syriac that was spoken in those regions, and so. Anyway, I'll move on from there. But yeah, I was surprised. Wikipedia is giving me some pretty interesting things there. Let's continue.
Very clearly written, composed in Greek. So if you're trying to look even to some of the earliest stories about what these Gospels actually were, they don't align with making us think that they're eyewitnesses. The other thing is they really contradict about...
There's nothing in what he said that makes it so they're not eyewitnesses. And even the testimony of Papias, the testimony of Jerome, that doesn't negate anything. Like, just because someone said, hey, there was a Bible in Hebrew that matched up with Matthew's gospel, and who better to translate something into Hebrew than Matthew? Or to do an original in that language and to put it into the Greek. Obviously, we don't have that Hebrew today. And so, I know the skeptics will go, it's a lost thing and it was suppressed or whatever. But it's like, usually from a Christian perspective, when you believe in preservation, it's like, well, if it didn't last to today, God sort of had his hand in that and just went, well, okay. And perhaps there was persecution against that. Perhaps it was totally eradicated. I think there are things that have come out in history that have just been so thoroughly attacked that they're just gone. They're no longer with us. So perhaps the Jews hated this because it was just, it just condemned them to that they should be born again.
Things that you would expect eyewitnesses to know about. So the Gospels align on a lot of things, but where they start to tell unique stories, they start to really contradict each other. So Mark doesn't have...
So they align on a lot of things, which is a problem. But then when they don't align on things, that's a problem. And contradictions, that's a word I'm going to throw in there.
I have a birth story about Jesus, Matthew and Luke both do, and they completely contradict each other about many important details in the birth story, including where Jesus went after he was born, what time he was born in.
Okay, so where Jesus went after he was born. So this is the stuff like Bart Ehrman said this in his retirement lecture. And when you go through it, it's like, no, it's a sequence. And you can clearly see this. And like there's so many places. And like you said, there's so many contradictions. These guys offer so many that it's a bit like when people say, I challenge people and say, okay, where are there problems in the King James? And they give me a list of like 100. And I just usually say to them, look, I'll go through the first 3 or 4. If they're wrong, you have to admit to me that they're wrong. But usually they don't. I'll go through the first one, Easter's this and that, and I go through it. This other word, kill or murder, it's a problem. No, it's not. And you start going through all these so-called problems, and I haven't got time to go through 100 when they're just nothings. And so he's probably going to do whole entire videos on these issues. Bart Ehrman's bringing up these issues. Now, obviously, I do want to sort of wrap this video up in one session, but if I only get halfway, that's fine. I'll just do a part 2, because I'd rather go through with a fine-tooth comb everything that he's saying and catch everything, rather than just sort of skip over it and then later on sort of wish that I addressed it. So I'm not going to rush through.
And was he born under Herod or Quirinius? Those 2 reigns happened 10 years apart. So you get these contradictions.
Okay, so he's saying there's a contradiction that is with Herod. And so let me chat GPT this. Is there a contradiction? About when Jesus was born?
Born in? Was he born under Herod? Including where Jesus went after he was born, what time he was born in. Was he born under Herod or Quirinius? Those two reigns.
So ChatGPT says, no, there is no demonstrable contradiction between Jesus being born under Herod the Great and the reference to Quirinius in Luke. The alleged contradiction rests on a modern assumption about Luke 2:2, not on airtight historical data. Below is a precise technical breakdown. What the text actually says. Jesus was born in the days of Herod the king, Matthew 2:1. Herod the Great died in 4 BC, according to Josephus. Okay. Then in Luke, it says Jesus was born during a registration. And so that was the registration for taxation. And then in Luke 2:2, it says, and this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. So the issue hinges entirely on Luke 2:2, not on Matthew. So the standard critical claim, critics argue Quirinius, so they're just spelling it different ways, like with a C and with a Q here. He governed Syria AD 6 to 7. Herod died 4 BC. Therefore, Luke contradicts Matthew. This assumes Quirinius governed Syria only once, that Luke 2:2 must refer to AD 6 and first means the same census Josephus mentions. All three assumptions are disputable. The Greek of Luke 2:2 is the key, and it's got the Greek text there, and it says critical points that prote does not have to mean first in a sequence. It can mean former, earlier, or before. This is well attested in Koine Greek. Legitimate translations. This registration took place before Quirinius was governing Syria. Several scholars, even non-KJV scholars, Textus Receptus scholars, acknowledge this as grammatically valid. Luke may be distinguishing two censuses. Josephus records a well-known census under Quirinius in AD 6. This census caused unrest. Acts 5:37 refers to it. Luke, writing later, may be saying this was the earlier census, not the famous one under Quirinius. In other words, Luke is clarifying, not confusing. He knows about the AD 6 census. He distinguishes it from the one at Jesus' birth. Was Quirinius active earlier than AD 6? Yes, possibly and plausibly. Evidence. Quirinius was a senior Roman official well before AD 6. He conducted military campaigns in the region. Roman administrative roles were fluid, not modern governorships. Syria often had overlapping authority figures. We lack full Roman records for this period. Absence of evidence does not equal contradiction. So governor is a broad term. Luke does not use the technical term title legatus. So it can mean ruling, administrating, exercising authority. Luke uses the term flexibly. Elsewhere, Pilate, Felix, Festus. Thus, Quirinius need not be the sole or official governor in AD 6. He could have had an earlier administrative authority. And so there's so much here. ChatGPT is wild. Luke's historical reliability cuts against the contradiction claim. Luke names correct rulers repeatedly. Pilate, like Senius, Herod Antipas, accurately describes Roman legal procedures, is corroborated externally in Acts dozens of times. It is historically implausible that Luke knows the AD 6 census, mentions it elsewhere in Acts 5:37. Now, I've got to read Acts 5:37. It's come up a few times. Let's just check that out. And it says, after this man rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of the taxing and drew away many people after him, he also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him. Okay, so it's a very interesting little tidbit. The New King James says the days of the census. Okay. Yet mistakenly dates Jesus' birth by a decade without noticing. So, yeah, that's a very interesting thing. Luke gets so many things accurately. He talks about so many things accurately. And I guess it's like saying, someone was a politician. They might have been in the Senate, they might have been in Congress, they might have been, a president or a prime minister or whatever, but they can just be in a political position. And so being a ruler, that can have different aspects. And so, and depending on, like someone like Josephus, he would be focusing on something else. And the thing is too, people just don't come out of nowhere. I'm ruling now, and then they're faded away. Usually they're climbing up a ladder or whatever, and they might be second in charge. Then they're the main guy. Then they're not anymore, or then they become the main guy again. And sometimes these so-called contradictions in the Old Testament, where there's certain kings who ruled for a certain amount of times, sometimes it's the second time that they've ruled, and people just haven't seen that. They haven't thought about it. But when you read back in the other narratives, it talks about it. And so these contradictions they're just nothings. Like, seriously. So why the contradiction persists? Because modern scholars often fix Luke 2:2 to one translation. They assume Josephus is exhaustive. They assume Roman administration was tidy. They reject harmonization a priori. That is philosophy, not neutral history. Bottom line, Matthew places Jesus' birth under Herod the Great. That's solid. Luke does not require an AD 6 date. The Greek allows an earlier census. Luke may explicitly distinguish it from the AD 6 census. Roman administrative history allows overlapping authority. There's no contradiction that is proven here. At most, there is like an unresolved historical question, but that's not an error. And so, very interesting. Let's continue.
It's happened 10 years apart. So you get these contradictions. Fair enough. Maybe somebody might say, well, that wasn't part of the eyewitness account. Certainly the gospel writers weren't there to see Jesus be born. But you have the same thing with the crucifixion and with the...
So he's like, oh, well, maybe some people might say, well, and so the thing is, when he says this type of thing, he has someone giving an answer for why there is this concrete problem in the text. And I'm like, there's no problem in the text. Where he's like, well, some people can even give an answer to this and say, well, Luke was just trying his best, sort of thing. He wasn't there when Jesus was born. So, he's going on other information and history. And so he just got it wrong, sort of thing. And it's like he's not even like still manning a proper answer for a lot of the claims that he makes. He doesn't say, well, he's the best answer that I've come across. It's, like what I was just reading there. He's like, oh, well, some people say that, hey, it could just be a contradiction. That's just a mistake that entered in there. And it's like, who said that? But the problem is that's usually an answer that's given, like, in Josh McDowell's sort of work, and people come up with these type of things. They think that is a contradiction, and they're trying to work that out. And I'm like, there's no contradiction there. It's just simply not a contradiction.
Post-resurrection accounts of Jesus. So Mark is supposed to be written as a recollection of Peter's accounts, and Mark really just ends his gospel by saying that the women come to an empty tomb and they go away.
And so this is where he shows that he follows the whole thing. The last 12 verses of Mark are not genuine, which shows that he follows the critical text. If he was a free-thinking person, he would just turn around and say, hey, there is so much evidence for the last 12 verses of Mark that's the camp that I'm jumping into. Now, obviously, there's a lot of TR King James people who believe that. But really, because in my mind, the critical text guys are in sort of like a heavy delusion. You have to be deluded to follow the Westcott and Hort text, like in my estimation. Because there's so many things that are so easily shown to be problems with the Westcott and Hort text. Like just say for one example, when it says God was manifest in the flesh, okay. Now, that creates a solecism in the text. Probably the biggest solecism in the whole Nestle Alarm text, okay. It has a predicate without a subject. Now, in Greek, schoolboy Greeks wouldn't make this error, but their New Testament does. And it has who appeared in a body. It has os instead of theos. So it causes a solecism. And this isn't even denied. Westcott and Hort said, yeah, there's a solecism there. And they just basically came up with this theory that Paul broke into song, or they popularized this theory that was already around. And it's a massive blunder in their text. So it just makes more sense that the grammar is good. And there's so many other reasons. Like even James White says that the TR reading is correct there in his King James only book. And so other people, they don't go that far into critical text cuckoo land. But the thing is, there are so many things like that. And that's a massive error. It destroys probably the strongest verse that says that Jesus is God. Obviously, Unitarians like George Van Smith, who worked with Westcott and Hort, wanted that changed. He got what he wanted, and they destroyed the text. Now it's in our modern Bibles, and we're just like, oh man, what a terrible reading. It's a solecism. And so I can clearly see that. I've gone through so many examples and just seen holes in the Westcott and Hort text, and also the methodologies of Westcott and Hort. But it seems like Cornthwaite is just swallowing that, because Bart Ehrman's baptized in all that stuff. Westcott and Hort dribble is just coming out of his mouth all the time. Contradictions in the text, problems in the text, variants. The Byzantine text is not even worth considering. But yeah, so here we have Cornthwaite jumping in both feet into the last 12 verses of Mark are not genuine. Then he's going, because the gospel ends there, it causes these problems. And it's like, yeah, but think outside of the box, dude. Like even someone like, James Snap Jr., Maurice Robinson, these other people, they're not, TR people. They're not King James only people, whatever. They follow Byzantine priority or majority text, whatever they're following. But they have good argumentation for, the last 12 verses of Mark to be in there. People like Tommy Wasserman and Jennifer Knust, who've written, To Cast a Verse Stone, they're critical text people. That they are just as unbelieving as this guy. Tommy Wasserman said he doesn't believe in a literal hell. Jennifer Knust is like Bart Ehrman, just with a dress on. And they're the go-to gurus, and he's probably in his seminary being guided to that book to cast the first stone, and it causes so many problems. But then he's like, okay, I'm going to delete those because the new cult that I'm involved with, that Westcott and Hort sort of started, they don't want those verses in there, and now there's a contradiction there because those verses aren't there. And it's like, you've created the problem, now you got more problems. And it's like, just put the verses back in where they belong and there's no problem. And that's the thing. It's like with the Commuhanium, with the solecism that's there in the text. If you have the Commuhanium there, there's no solecism. If you don't have the Commuhanium in there, there's a problem. There's a mismatched genders in verse 8. The genders are changed for no reason whatsoever. So we're about to get into that, or I might just finish that thought of Mark 16.
And they say nothing to nobody. That's how Mark originally ended. But what you have in other Gospels are these accounts of Jesus showing up to disciples and having all these meals with them and letting Thomas put his hand in his side. So you don't really have something consistent with.
So he's got, Matthew 28, was it Luke, is it 23 and 24? And then you got Mark 16, which if you read through, he's there with them. He preaches to them. He says, these signs shall follow those that believe. And he talks about it. And there's a lot in Mark 16. But he's just deleted that because of 2 manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. He rejects 1,634 manuscripts and goes with 2. And then he's like, and there's a contradiction there now, which isn't in, like he's saying, well, the other Gospels say these other things. So wouldn't that be evidence that Mark 16, the longer edition, should be in there? But it's like, no, it ends abruptly. It ends with gar, which means 4. So why would it end on that? And it's only Vaticanus and Sinaiticus that don't have the words in there. And he's like, oh, and there's a contradiction because those words are taken out. It's like, dude, just don't take the words out and you don't have a contradiction. But he is in Bart Ehrman land. He is in critical text land. And no wonder he doesn't believe the Bible anymore, because he has drunk the Kool-Aid.
People who are just seeing different things. You actually have contradictory stories that were obviously evolving. So the Gospels don't really fit with.
That were obviously evolving. But there's no demonstration of this evolution. There's more so a demonstration that recently they have omitted the last 12 verses of Mark from the text because of Vaticanus, which was pretty much rejected by everyone all through the Reformation period. Erasmus looked at it and he was like, man, it's probably a back translation from a Latin document. It wasn't favored. It had some historical things in it, like with apocryphal readings and stuff, but that's about it. People looked at it like it's a weird, bizarre, 2-headed step cousin. And it's like, then you got Sinaiticus come along, which is just as weird. And the thing is, where was Vaticanus copied? Who copied that and promoted it? Hardly no one. Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, where were these copied? Where are the Bible translations based on these? They don't exist. They're just standalone weird things. They were at the bottom of the barrel, and then someone tipped the barrel upside down and said, they're the best now. And that overrides everything. And so he has swallowed this theory hook, line, and sinker. And he's saying that he is neutral. He just wants to go where the evidence leads him, but he's following the Westcott and Hort text theory and Unitarians, and he's following this type of concept. He's jumped into the critical text camp. He's believing you should delete the Pericope Adulterae, the last 12 verses of Mark, the Communion. He's just the average sort of Christian apologetic. He's still believing that. And this is his problem here, that this is what caused the unbelief, was like, oh, that you can't trust those 12 verses. You throw them in the bin. What happens to your mind when you're like, oh, okay, let's just throw, say, 2nd John in the bin, or 3rd John in the bin, or Jude, you know, like there's so many words involved with just those two. There's 24 verses involved. There's a lot of problems. And in your mind, you're like, you can't trust the Bible. And then you're reading, trying to do the scholarly thing and reading through and looking at To Cast the First Stone and looking at Bart Ehrman's recommended this reading and that reading, and you go through it all and you get to the nth degree and it's like complete unbelief, and you're seeing contradictions now in the text. They simply aren't there. It's like going and looking for the Yeti or Sasquatch. It's like these things just don't exist. If you just leave the Bible alone, go with the Textus Receptus, go with the King James Bible, you don't have this problem. But if you go with the modern critical text, you have lots of problems. I could show you hundreds of contradictions in the critical text. Jesus lies and says, I'm not going up to the feast. The TR says, I'm not going up to the feast yet. The Bible says that Jesus said, if you get angry with your brother, you're in danger of judgment. The TR says, if you get angry with your brother without a cause or without a good, genuine reason, you're in danger of judgment. That's a big difference, because later on, Jesus got angry with the Pharisees. So he's in danger of judgment, I guess. It's contradiction, like all the way through the critical text. No wonder Cornthwaite is basically an unbeliever. Tribe with Fire says there's archaeological evidence such as lapis tibertinus inscription mentions an official, likely Quirinius, governed Syria twice, or at least held high authority twice there. Wow, that's very interesting. Tribe with Fire says Dave Hunt covers these supposed contradictions in his sermon, The Bible Gives Dates. Hilly says, I love Dave. Yeah, I went through the Berean call material. I can still remember the little trumpety sort of that they used to play at the beginning of each show. And I had the Berean call, every MP3 that they made. It was probably up until like 2007 or something. I just had hundreds of them, and none of them had titles or names. So I just click on it and listen to it. Sometimes I'd heard it before, but I'd listen again, and that was great. I really enjoyed Dave's stuff. T.A. McMahon, I think his name was. Yeah, interesting. One day we'll sit and talk with Dave. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I learned a lot from Dave Hunt, and it was interesting because he was sort of like a TR guy, and he, like, against the popular trends, he was like, no, the King James is fine, and he also was a pre-trib guy. There were lots of very good, interesting things about him. It was Zola who correlated the development of the human fetus to the holy days. Astounding. Okay. Old Man Patriot says, a few things come to mind. 2 Timothy 2:23 and 1 Corinthians 2:14. I won't argue with lost people. Only God opens the eyes of the humble heart, those who will accept the truth. Matthew 16:17. Hilly says, pretty much the same here, old man. I had a guy argue he didn't need Jesus. He said he speaks directly to the Father. Whoa.
Being eyewitness accounts. And I'll talk about this in the next few points, but they show evidence of transmission, evolution, growth, communities behind them with differently formed theology. And this suggests that they're much later. There's this.
No, you're reading way too much into the text to say that the baptism of Jesus story evolved. It's got to be a Bart Ehrman thing that he's read and, misquoting Jesus, or, Jesus interrupted or whatever. Maybe I can type that in. Bart Ehrman, Jesus baptism contradiction. The guy on Testify's done a video. I'm going to check this out.
Bart Ehrman said
he does some pretty funny videos, this guy. I've got to get more into him.
Is that the Gospels are chock full of colossal contradictions, but the examples he serves up shows that he's just not honest with the text. On pages 40 through 41 of his book, Jesus Interrupted, he writes, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus, after his baptism, goes off into the wilderness where he will be tempted by the devil. Mark is especially quite clear about the matter. What about John? In John, there is no account of Jesus being tempted by the devil in the wilderness. The day after this, Bart Ehrman says that the Gospels are...
Okay, so that's actually not to do with the baptism. I hate that. Claims that Gospels contradict. Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Answering Bart Ehrman. And today we're going to look at...
Okay, so there's lots and lots. Like, they're running a ministry, Answering Bart Ehrman. I've got to subscribe to those guys. I'll go through some of their stuff. That'll be interesting. Okay, anyway, I won't bore you guys with just videos on the side, rabbit trailing. I'll at least try and get to halfway, but I might even shut it down soon, and we'll just do a part 2.
This kind of trick that apologists often play, that if scholars say the Gospel of Mark is dated anywhere from like 65 to like up into the 2nd century, a Christian apologist will usually look at that and say, yeah, that means it was written in 60. So they're always trying to push the dates earlier. They're always trying to...
And I would agree with this, that when it comes to manuscripts, people go, oh, someone dated it as 200, so it could be 190, it could be 180, round about there. And also what they'll do is there'll be 10 people who put a date on something, and they'll go with the one that says it's 150,
To erase that there was any...
But the thing is, too, I think Christians are usually pretty generous when it comes to, like, say, the Book of Revelation, putting it at 96, like most people do. I mean, I know some people put it at before 70 due to their presuppositions and their eschatology. But I've often thought that perhaps everything was written beforehand, like maybe things were written very early, but we're just not thinking outside of the box enough. There just seems to be this war between the preterists and the futurists, people saying, oh, the Book of Revelation was written here. Like, I've got no problem with the Book of Revelation being written, like, say, 90 to 96 or whatever. But, and I've got no real reason theologically or presuppositionally to say, it's before 70, but perhaps it is before 70. I just like to think outside of the box. And I was even thinking today, perhaps everything is earlier, but because critics are like, no, you're just putting it earlier. You're just, you've got a barrow to push. And so we sort of always give the benefit of the doubt and push it back. But perhaps it is 60, perhaps it's 50, what's to say it's not? And I guess, I need to study more into what early church writers have said about, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and, a very interesting study is going through the authorship of these books. But let's continue.
Tradition being formed and passed on between the time of Jesus' death and between the time of the gospel writers. And I don't think that was the case. I think we're talking about 30, 40, 50 years in between these accounts. And that's really important. And we'll see in other points why I think this is the case.
So he's got a presupposition. And so Christians, if they've got a presupposition, they're just desperate. But if he's got a presupposition, that's fine. And that's what he believes. And that's, he's going to bring that case out later and show you why he thinks this way. And it's like, well, how come you can have a presupposition but other people can't? How come you can have, your neutral scholarship, but it leads you in exactly the same direction as people who don't have neutral scholarship, like Bart Ehrman? But but the Christians are the ones to be scolded. The Christians are the ones to be slapped over the hand for having, bringing to the table certain beliefs. Now, I'm all for just having a blank slate and saying, okay, let's just go where the evidence leads. But it doesn't seem like Cornthwaite has that. It seems like he already has in his mind, well, the Gospels are written, with a 50-year gap between them, sort of thing. And it's like, okay, well, you've already decided that, someone's taught you that.
The second thing I wanted to respond to is Wes saying we have really strong eyewitness for the resurrection. And I think this question is a lot more complex.
So what I might do, because it sort of continues on to the question of the resurrection. And so because it does go into the next section and it sort of goes for another 3 or 4 minutes, I might just cut it short there because I've already gone for 2 hours and 30 minutes. And I don't want to just get tired and take up all you guys' time just to have a marathon. I'll catch up with these comments and then I'll probably shut it down. And I'll try and do a part 2 whenever I can. So I'll read some of the comments and then I'll just double check and make sure that we've sort of covered everything. Okay, so Try with Fire says T.A. McMahon just stepped down, president of the Bryan Call last year, although he's still involved with the daily goings on as president. Hilly says he didn't know he stepped down. He and Dave Reagan should team up. I haven't heard much of Dave Reagan. I've never actually heard of him. Dave Reagan recently, he's retired. Dale, you still here? Yes. And Hilly Billy says, Nick, out of curiosity, are you familiar with Halley's Bible commentary? Halley's. Was there a book by Halley's about Bible contradictions, which was written in 1920s or something? Halley's Bible. Halley's Bible Handbook, the New Bible Commentary. Okay, 1965, Halley's. Interesting. Zondervan. I can't remember. Looks interesting. Hilly says, Old Man Patriot says, I'm aware there are not many people on my island, but I believe the King James Bible is inspired. I've seen enough evidence, even the numbers. And Hilly says, no, many seminaries use it as a reference. Yes, that's it. Get a used copy. I think mine was $6. Wow. Cemetery school where the spirit goes to die. Cemetery, that is, yeah. But it's very popular to call a seminary a cemetery. And yeah, definitely, a lot of people have gone to a seminary and come out just absolutely confused, which shows you, that shouldn't be the case. People should go somewhere and be encouraged. But I think the whole concept of just going somewhere to learn about the Bible and then you qualify to stand in front of people and preach, probably the first thing that I would look for in someone who is qualified is that they evangelize. They go and tell people face to face, they witness to them, they either street preach or they hand out tracts, or they evangelize the best way that they know how. That would be almost like number one. If someone's doing that, it shows they actually care for people. It shows that they're going to have their finger on the pulse with the culture around them. They're not going to just be completely a dork who's out of touch and just like 10 generations back wearing a weird cardigan and just like, this is Christianity, they're going to be, they have to be out in public, and they will get challenged, and they have to work all these things out. People will come up to them who have watched Cornthwaite's videos and say, hey, the Bible contradicts itself here, 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 and here, and you're going to have to work those things out. And so oftentimes just going evangelizing solves like 80% of the Christians' problems. If you can get someone going out regularly evangelizing, they will just mature as a Christian. And like, to me, that's way more important than someone even learning Greek, learning Hebrew, going to seminary, because they will have to study all this stuff in real time. They'll run into a Jehovah's Witness who'll at first run rings around them, and they'll go home and study it all, and then the next time they'll run rings around them, and they'll then listen intently to sermons, and they'll try and dig for more information. And yes, anyway, that's my 5 cents. Tribal Fire says, I was just watching you evangelize in Papua New Guinea last night, Nick. It came up in my feed, so I watched it. Oh, cool. Yeah, I've been to Papua New Guinea 13 times. Great place, very open to the gospel. And I would preach until my throat would burn out. And so I think one time we were there, we preached for 12 hours. And we preached until the amp ran out of battery. We charged the amp, had some lunch, came back out and did it again. And someone counted like 20 pastors who were there just on the streets. There was probably 300 or 400 people. Great opportunities. And like, I've been in PNG out the front of the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm just there preaching, and there's a huge crowd, and people just started asking questions. And they were asking questions about Martin Luther. They were asking questions about, which Bible is accurate. They're asking questions about Mary. Should I pray to Mary? This sort of thing. And it was awesome. Like, and this is just on the streets with hundreds of people, and like PNG is just like one of the best places to go. And look, I would just encourage people, if they want to get into evangelism, just go somewhere where no one knows you. Okay, is where you go and people know you, you're gonna be a little bit intimidated or whatever. Now, if you're not intimidated by that, just go for it. But most people are. So just think, okay, I'm going to go to this particular town and go there and just like street preach, evangelize, hand out tracts, just be, and just say the gospel. You don't even have to make up stuff. Just say, God, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever, just quote that, then quote, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, the wages of sin is death. Just memorize. You can even read it from a card. Just get a New Believers thing, or how to evangelize, and with 10 verses, and just preach them. And after a while, you'll start going, yeah, well, God does love you. He loves the whole world. He gave his only begotten son. That's Jesus. Jesus died on the cross for you. And after a while, it just starts flowing out, because so many people have become damn Christians. And when I say damn Christians, I mean they're like a dam. They're full of information. They're full of seminary stuff, but they're a dam, and they need to let it flow out. The Dead Sea has no outlet. So it's just full of salt and death. If you look at the Sea of Galilee, it has an inlet and an outlet. the water flows in and out, and that's what we need to be. Rivers of living water flowing. We need to have something flowing out of us. And and there's so many opportunities, especially with Facebook and YouTube, do this sort of thing. There's so many things that you can just get on your phone and record yourself preaching. Maybe that's what you need to do rather than going off into the town. Because some people don't like street preaching. Some people don't like face-to-face evangelism, confrontation, all that. But they'll watch a YouTube video, and you might make a YouTube video and you might get like 100 people watch it, and they're all very interested in Christianity. All of a sudden, you've just, that's great, So anyway, I am going to shut this down. Thanks, guys, for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. God bless you.